The station called Lies 9 floated at the edge of 3 solar systems, belonging to none of them. That was the point. It was neutral ground, built over 300 years ago by the founders of the Galactic Council so that no species could claim an advantage when they came to talk. The walls were made of white stone, shipped from a dead planet that no one owned. The floors were cold and smooth. The air was kept thin and odorless because no 2 species could agree on what a pleasant smell was. Ambassador Sarah Voss had been on the station for 6 days. She was a tall woman with short gray hair and dark eyes that had a habit of going very still when she was thinking hard. She had spent 30 years in Earth's diplomatic service. She had negotiated trade agreements with the Lyrae, signed border treaties with the Shen Collective, and once talked a mining consortium out of starting a war over an asteroid field, using nothing but a cup of cold coffee and 2 hours of patience. She was, by any measure, the best humanity had. She wore the standard diplomatic uniform, dark blue jacket, no medals, no symbols of rank. Her instructions from the assembly had been simple. Be polite, be patient, get humanity a seat at the table. She walked into the Grand Conclave Hall on the morning of the 7th day and took her seat at the visitors' platform, a low, circular stage in the center of the room, surrounded on all sides by the raised galleries of the council delegates. The hall could hold 2,000 beings. Today, it held 412. Most of them did not look at her. The Vreth delegates sat directly ahead, in the highest gallery. There were 9 of them, draped in long silver robes, their gray skin smooth and almost reflective under the station's white lights. The Vreth were one of the oldest spacefaring species in the galaxy. They had been members of the Council for over 4,000 years. They did not look at Ambassador Voss the way one looks at a threat. They looked at her the way someone looks at an insect that has wandered in through an open window. The session was called to order by the presiding speaker, a Korathi delegate whose 6 arms moved constantly as it spoke, tapping the podium in rhythms that served as punctuation in its language. The translator in Voss's ear rendered its words in flat, even English. This session of the Grand Conclave is convened to hear the application of the species designate human, of the 3rd planet of the Sol system, for provisional membership in the Galactic Council. Voss stood. She had prepared her speech for 4 months. She had rehearsed it 200 times. She spoke clearly and without rushing, laying out humanity's case, the population, the technology, the explored systems, the treaties already signed with lesser species. She spoke about what humanity could offer, resources, labor, ideas. She did not beg, she did not flatter. She made a clear and reasonable argument, and then she sat down. There was silence for a moment. Then the Vreth High Speaker rose. His name was Drav Sen. He was older than any living human institution. He had attended 600 council sessions. When he spoke, the entire hall went quiet without being asked to. The council, he said, has reviewed the application of the human species. Voss sat straighter. The council finds the application insufficient. The human species is young, unstable, prone to internal conflict. They have been in space for fewer than 300 years. They have no established doctrine of interstellar law. They have no history of collective governance beyond their single planet. He paused. The application is denied. Voss opened her mouth to respond. She never got the words out. Drav Sen raised one long gray hand and made a gesture so small it looked almost casual, like a man waving away a fly. 2 things happened at once. A faint blue glow appeared around the edge of the visitor's platform, and the temperature inside it rose. It rose fast. She looked at the blue barrier around her. She turned and looked at the council galleries. 412 delegates watched her. Most of them did not move. Some leaned forward slightly. The Korathi presiding speaker had stopped tapping its podium. She did not scream. She did not beg. Her dark eyes swept the room one final time, and whatever she was thinking in those last seconds, she kept to herself. The temperature inside the barrier reached approximately 2,000 degrees. It was over in less than 30 seconds. The blue glow faded. The visitors' platform was empty. The air in the hall smelled faintly of heat. Drab Sen sat back down in his chair. Several delegates across the hall began quiet conversations with their neighbors. The presiding speaker tapped its podium 3 times and called for a recess. The session was over. Consul Davin Rice had been sitting in the observation anteroom 40 meters away when it happened. He was 26 years old. He had been assigned to the mission as Voss's junior staff, his primary job being to manage communications and keep records. He had a round, unremarkable face, and the kind of nervous energy that made him check his datapad every few minutes, even when nothing had changed. He had been watching the session on the anteroom screen because junior staff were not permitted in the main hall during formal proceedings. When the blue barrier appeared, he stood up from his chair. When the heat rose, he put his hand over his mouth. When the platform was empty, he stood perfectly still for 11 seconds. His mind did something that minds sometimes do in moments of complete shock. It went very quiet and very clear. He was not thinking about what he had just seen. He was thinking about what came next. He moved. The station had 3 docking bays. The human diplomatic courier ship was in Bay 2. He had authorization codes for it because as communications officer, he was responsible for any emergency transmissions. He walked. He did not run, because running would attract attention, through 3 corridors and 2 security checkpoints. He smiled at the security scanner. His hands were completely steady. The recording of the session was already on his datapad. It had been recording automatically, as all council sessions were. He boarded the courier ship, locked the hatch, broadcast a standard departure request, and received clearance from docking control within 4 minutes. They did not know yet what he had on his pad. Or perhaps they simply did not care. Perhaps they believed it did not matter. The courier ship broke from List 9 and entered the jump corridor toward Sol. Davin Reese sat in the pilot's seat and looked at the stars. His hands, which had been perfectly steady through the corridors and the checkpoints and the launch sequence, began to shake. He pressed them flat against his thighs and breathed slowly. He did not watch the recording again. He had already seen it once. Once was enough. The jump took 31 hours. When the courier dropped out of FTL in Earth's orbital space, Reese immediately opened a priority channel to the United Earth Assembly and transmitted everything he had. Then he sat back and closed his eyes. By the time the ship docked, every screen on Earth, in every city, in every home, on every public wall, was showing the same 30 seconds of footage, over and over again. A woman standing in a blue light, a flash of heat, an empty platform. The planet did not make much noise at first. It went very quiet, and that silence, if anyone in the Galactic Council had been paying attention, was far more dangerous than any scream. The message from the Galactic Council arrived at Earth's communication relay 48 hours after Davin Reese docked his courier ship. It was addressed to the United Earth Assembly and marked as a formal diplomatic communication, which meant it carried the seal of the presiding speaker and had been routed through the official Interstellar Protocol channels. Someone on the council had taken the time to make it look proper. The message was 7 paragraphs long. The first 3 were procedural language about the nature of interstellar law and the sovereignty of council proceedings. The 4th paragraph acknowledged that Ambassador Sarah Voss had been subjected to a corrective action during her appearance before the conclave. The 5th paragraph described this action as necessary and within the rights of the council to administer in response to a breach of accepted diplomatic conduct. The 6th paragraph stated that the human species remained without recognized status under interstellar law, and therefore had no formal grounds for grievance. The 7th paragraph advised Earth to refrain from any response that the Council might interpret as hostile, and noted that such a response would result in immediate and comprehensive sanctions against all human activity beyond the Sol system. The Assembly's communication director read the message 3 times. Then she walked it down to the chamber herself, rather than sending it electronically, because she did not want it sitting in anyone's inbox for even a minute longer than necessary. The Assembly had been in emergency session since the footage arrived. There were 240 elected representatives in the chamber, drawn from every nation on Earth. They had been arguing for the better part of 2 days. There were people who wanted to send a formal protest. There were people who wanted to request an independent investigation through the Lyrae, who had shown some quiet sympathy toward humanity. There were people who wanted to do nothing at all and wait, on the grounds that a war with the Galactic Council was not something any honest military analyst thought humanity could survive. The communication director placed the Council's message on the floor speaker's podium. The chamber read it. Then Representative Amara Osei of the West African Bloc stood up without being called upon. She was 61 years old, a small woman with white locks and a voice that carried without her needing to raise it. She had spent 40 years in public service. She had never in her career called for anything that could be described as violent. "They killed her," she said. "They killed her in front of 400 witnesses on a neutral station for asking for a seat at a table. And then they sent us a message explaining why they were allowed to." She looked around the chamber. "I want to know how many people in this room are still looking for a third option." No one spoke. The floor speaker called a vote. The motion was for a formal declaration of total war against the Galactic Council and all member species that participated in, approved, or failed to oppose the execution of Ambassador Sarah Voss. The vote took 47 minutes. It was not because people were uncertain. It was because the process required a roll call of all 240 representatives, and every one of them had to speak their vote aloud, on the record, with their name attached. The final count was 238 in favor. 2 representatives abstained. None voted against. The chamber was quiet for a moment after the result was announced. Then the floor speaker picked up a communication terminal and placed a call to Earth's Joint Military Command. Admiral Kira Osman was in her office at the Orbital Command Station when the call came through. She was 49 years old, with a lean face and hair pulled back tightly. She had spent her career in deep space operations, mostly running patrol routes along the outer system boundary. She was not famous. The Assembly had chosen her precisely because she was not famous. They wanted someone who would not spend time thinking about their own legacy. Her aide put the footage on screen before the call even connected, because everyone had seen it by then. Osman watched it once, the blue light, the heat, the empty platform. She did not say anything for 3 minutes. Her aide, who had worked with her for 6 years, did not speak either. He understood that she was not processing shock. She was processing information. She was already thinking about fuel loads and jump coordinates and weapons yield. When the Assembly's call connected, the floor speaker told her she had been appointed Supreme Commander of the newly designated Expeditionary Armada. She was given total authority over military planning, resource allocation, and the execution of the war. There were no conditions attached. The Assembly had decided that conditions were a luxury for situations that were less clear than this one. "Understood," Osman said. "I will need full access to all shipyard production lines within the hour. I want a logistics report on current fleet readiness by tonight. And I want someone to find Consul Davin Rees and get him to my office within 24 hours. He is the only human who was on that station. I need everything he remembers." The call ended. She sat back in her chair and looked out at the stars through the station viewport. Then she opened a channel to the shipyard directors. What followed was something the galaxy had never seen before, not because it was dramatic, but because of how fast it was. Human shipyards had been running at standard capacity for years, producing exploratory vessels, cargo haulers, and the modest patrol fleet that handled traffic at the system boundary. Within 72 hours of the Assembly's vote, Every civilian shipyard in Earth's orbit had been nationalized. The workers were not laid off. They were reassigned. Engineers who had been designing passenger liners were handed new blueprints. Factory floors that had been printing hull panels for mining ships were reconfigured overnight. The energy signatures were enormous. Enormous enough that 3 separate alien intelligence services picked them up within a week and filed reports to their respective governments. The reports were mostly dismissed. The analysts who wrote them were told, politely, that a species without interstellar standing, without allies, without even a recognized place in galactic law, could not meaningfully threaten the Council. The Council had member species who had been building warships for thousands of years. The idea that humanity could close that gap in any relevant time frame was not taken seriously. What the analysts had missed, because nothing in their data had prepared them for it, was that humans had a particular relationship with urgency. Most spacefaring species built slowly because they had been building for a long time and saw no reason to rush. Humanity had not been in space long enough to develop that patience. They still built the way they had built everything throughout their history, as if there was a deadline, as if something was coming, as if the next crisis was always just over the horizon. The deadline now was real, and it had a name, and its name was Sarah Voss. In the weeks that followed, alien observers watching the Sol system through long-range sensors reported something that they struggled to describe in their own languages. The closest translation, in most cases, was something like a fire that had found its purpose. Davin Reese arrived at Osman's office on the second day. He was still wearing the same jacket he had worn on Lice 9, because no one had thought to tell him to change, and he had not thought to do it himself. He sat across from the Admiral and told her everything. Every corridor, every face, every detail he could remember about the station's layout, the Council's security arrangements, the delegates' behavior before and after. Osman listened without interrupting. She took no notes. When he finished, she looked at him for a moment and said, "You're coming with the fleet." Reese looked at her. "I'm a consul, Admiral. I'm not military." "I know what you are," she said. "That's why I need you." He nodded, slowly, and did not argue. Outside the viewport, in the dark of space, the new ships were already taking shape. The galaxy had sent humanity a message. Humanity was preparing its reply. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Vreth space at 0400 station time, which was a measurement that meant nothing to the Vreth, but had been chosen deliberately by Admiral Osman, because her crew's schedules were built around it, and she wanted everyone alert and rested when they arrived. There were 217 ships. Not all of them were warships in the traditional sense. Some were converted haulers with weapons fitted to their cargo frames. Some were prototype vessels that had come off the production line so recently that the hull paint was still curing during the jump. They were not beautiful ships. They were not elegant. They were angular and dense and built the way a fist is built, without any interest in aesthetics, with total interest in function. Osman sat in the command chair of the flagship, a vessel designated UEAS Voss, named by unanimous vote of the crew without any instruction from above. She looked at the tactical screen for a moment, then she opened the fleet-wide channel. "This is the response," she said. She closed the channel. There was nothing else to say. The Vreth Defense Network detected the human fleet within seconds of arrival. The response was fast, because the Vreth had been watching human shipyard activity for weeks and were not entirely surprised. They had assembled a perimeter defense force of 90 ships, stationed at the outer boundary of their home system, supported by 7 automated weapons platforms that orbited at the midpoint. The Vreth fleet commander, a veteran officer named Reth Vaughn, had studied what little human combat history was available to the Council. Humanity had fought wars on their own planet for most of their history. They had experience with violence, but they had almost no experience with interstellar naval warfare. And Reth Vaughn had been doing it for 60 years. He expected to win this engagement. He expected it to be unpleasant, but he expected to win. He gave the order to hold the line and wait for the humans to commit to an approach vector. Osman did not commit to an approach vector. She split the fleet into 6 groups and sent them at the perimeter from 6 different angles at once, which meant that the Vreth defense line could not concentrate fire without leaving gaps. And the moment it left gaps, one of the human groups would push through. Reth Vaughn adjusted his formation. Osman adjusted hers. He adjusted again. She adjusted again, but faster. The thing Reth Vaughn had not accounted for was this. The humans were making decisions in seconds. Not because they were reckless, but because they had spent the entire transit from Sol running simulations and had already planned for 97 possible responses from a Vreth perimeter defense. Osman's crew had a response ready for each one. They were not improvising. They had already had this argument, already resolved it, and now they were simply executing. The first human ships to take damage did not retreat. This surprised Reth Vaughn more than anything else. Standard tactical doctrine across almost every spacefaring species held that a damaged ship withdrew to a safe distance, conducted repairs, and re-engaged only if the tactical situation required it. It was logical. It preserved assets. It was how wars were fought. The human ships did not do this. A damaged human vessel would slow down, redistribute power from non-essential systems to weapons and engines, and keep moving forward. The crew of one converted hauler, the Meridian, continued fighting with a hull breach in 2 sections and a disabled main engine for 40 minutes before they finally lost propulsion entirely. Even then, they used their remaining maneuvering thrusters to stay in weapons range. Reth Vaughn watched this on his sensor feed and felt for the first time in his career something he could not immediately name. It took him several seconds to identify it as unease. The perimeter line broke in 4 hours. The Korathi response came 2 days later. The Korathi were the second largest bloc in the Galactic Council, and their fleet was not assembled from aging patrol ships and converted haulers. It was a genuine military force, built over centuries, crewed by beings who thought in collective logic. The Korathi did not make emotional decisions. They calculated. They ran probability models. They executed the optimal solution. They sent 300 ships and positioned them in a mathematically perfect intercept formation, designed to eliminate the maximum number of human vessels in the shortest possible time. Osman looked at the formation on the tactical screen for a long moment. Then she turned to Davin Reese, who had been standing at the edge of the command deck for the past 2 days, observing. "They'll have calculated our most likely response," she said. "Yes," Reese said. "So we do the second most likely response." "What's the second most likely?" Osman almost smiled. "The one that makes no logical sense." She sent 40 ships, old ones, the slowest in the fleet, directly into the Korathi formation's center. A logical enemy would see them as a weak probe and redirect fire to eliminate them efficiently. Any reasonable tactical mind would treat them as the primary threat and concentrate on them. The Korathi did exactly that. The 40 ships were decoys. They were crewed by volunteers, given maximum shield power and minimal weapons, with one instruction: survive as long as possible and make as much noise as possible. While the Korathi formation's attention was on the center, Osman brought the rest of the fleet around the flanks in a curved approach that the Korathi's probability model had rated at less than 3% likelihood. Because no rational commander would expose that much of their fleet to potential encirclement just to achieve a flanking position. No rational commander would. But Osman was not optimizing for mathematical perfection. She was optimizing for surprise. The Korathi hive mind processed the new threat vectors in 0.4 seconds, which was genuinely fast. But by the time it had processed them and begun to redistribute its formation, the human flanking ships were already inside weapons range. The hive mind could recalculate. It could not undo the geometry. The Korathi fleet lost 112 ships in 6 hours. It was the first time in recorded council history that a Korathi fleet had broken contact mid-engagement. The message this sent across the galaxy was not subtle. On the 3rd day, the Council assembled an emergency joint peacekeeping fleet. It was the largest combined force the Council had put together in 500 years. 12 member species contributed ships. There were over 400 vessels in total, a mix of designs and doctrines and weapon systems that had never trained together. That last fact was the problem. A fleet that has never trained together can still fight, but it cannot fight as a unit. It fights as a collection of individuals, each falling back on its own instincts, its own doctrine, its own idea of what the commander probably wants. When things go wrong, when an unexpected development forces rapid adaptation, the gaps between those individuals become enormous. Things went wrong immediately. Osman had spent 3 days watching how each of the Council species fought. She knew the Vreth relied on long-range bombardment and did not like close engagements. She knew the Trell Confederacy ships were fast, but lightly armored, and would pull back under heavy fire. She knew the Korathi would calculate rather than feel. She hit each species the way it least expected to be hit. She pushed the Vreth into close range. She ignored the Trell ships and let them sit in their fast light formations, while she destroyed the heavier vessels behind them, knowing the Trell would not break formation to pursue without orders, and the orders would be slow to come, because the coalition's command structure was tangled and slow. The joint peacekeeping fleet lasted 9 hours. When the last Council ships jumped away, Osman's fleet was still intact, battered, some ships dark and drifting, but intact. She sat in the command chair of the Voss and looked at the tactical display for a long time. Her communications officer turned from his console. "Admiral, we're receiving signals from 6 independent alien broadcasts. They're reporting on the engagement." "What are they saying?" He listened for a moment. "Most of them are saying the same thing. They're saying that humanity doesn't stop." Osman said nothing. She looked at the stars. Somewhere ahead, past the wreckage and the silence, was the Council's seat of power. She had not forgotten why they were here. She had not forgotten the name on the hull of her flagship. She gave the order to advance. 3 weeks into the campaign, a small unmarked transport ship appeared at the edge of the human fleet's patrol perimeter and broadcast a request for contact on a frequency that was not standard military, not standard commercial, and not one that appeared in any Council protocol database. It had been assigned by the Lyrai government 40 years ago for quiet conversations that they did not want officially recorded. Osman's communications officer flagged it immediately. Osman told him to let it in. The transport docked with the Voss 40 minutes later. The being who came aboard was tall, thin, and pale blue, with long fingers and large dark eyes. Her name was Emissary Taev, and she was the senior diplomatic representative of the Lyrai, one of the smaller species in the Council. She wore no weapons. She carried a single data case. She was brought to the conference room and left alone with Osman and Reese. Taev set the data case on the table and opened it. Inside was a storage drive of a kind used by Council diplomatic services for secure record-keeping. She placed it in the center of the table and did not touch it again. "I want to be clear," she said through the translator, "that the Lyrai government has not sanctioned this meeting. I am here as an individual, acting on my own. If you choose to make use of what is on that drive, the Lyrai cannot be named as a source." "Understood," Osman said. "I also want to be clear," Taev continued, "that what is on that drive is genuine. I have spent 2 months verifying it. I would not be here if I had any doubt." Reese leaned forward. "What is it?" Taev looked at the drive for a moment. The Council's internal session records from the 4 months before Ambassador Voss arrived at Lys 9. The full records, not the versions that were filed publicly. There was a silence. "Those sessions," Taev said, "show that the execution of your ambassador was not a spontaneous action by Drav Sen. It was a decision made by a full majority of the Council in closed session, 6 weeks before she arrived. The Vreth proposed it. The Korathi seconded it. 13 other member species voted in favor. The plan was to deny humanity's application, and if your ambassador protested or attempted any kind of formal appeal, to eliminate her as a demonstration of the Council's authority over unregistered species." Reese sat very still. The statement that it was a rogue action, Tave continued, was agreed upon in a follow-up session 12 hours after the execution, when it became clear that your consul had escaped with a recording. The cover story was drafted collectively. It was a lie told by the entire council, together, in writing. Osmond looked at the drive. Why are you giving this to us? Tave's large dark eyes were steady. Because the Lyrae voted against the motion. We were 3 of the 7 species who voted against it. We were outvoted, and we said nothing publicly because we were afraid. She paused. I have spent my career telling myself that staying inside the council was the best way to protect my people, that we could change things slowly, from within, through patience and process. She looked at her hands. Watching what your fleet has done in the past 3 weeks has made me wonder if I was wrong about that. She stood, picked up the empty data case, and walked to the door. Do what you think is right with it, she said. You will anyway. Davin Reese spent the next 36 hours with the drive. He had been trained as a communications officer and a diplomat, not an intelligence analyst, but those roles had more in common than most people assumed. He understood how documents were structured, how records were formatted, how to tell a genuine file from an edited one. He cross-referenced the session dates against public council announcements from the same period. Every reference matched. The metadata was consistent. The voice recordings embedded in the files matched the known speech patterns of the delegates who had spoken. All of it. He put together a clean package, the original files, his verification notes, a clear written summary in plain language, and brought it to Osmond. She read the summary. She looked at the files. She did not speak for a while. They planned it, she said. It was not a question. Yes, Rice said. Before she even arrived. Yes. Osmond set the papers down. The council sent us a message saying it was a rogue action. They sent us that message while all of them were sitting in a room having agreed on the lie. Yes. She was quiet again. Then she said, I want this broadcast. Every channel you can reach. Every alien frequency and range. Full documentation included. I want every species in this galaxy to see what the council actually is. Rice nodded. He had been thinking the same thing. There's something else, he said. The Lyrae aren't the only ones who voted against the motion. There were 6 other species. Some of them are council members with real fleets and real resources. He paused. If we reach out to them, not to recruit them for the fight, just to show them that we know the truth, that we're not fighting blindly, some of them might move. Osmond looked at him. You think you can handle that? I think I can try. She almost smiled again. Go. Rice worked for 4 days straight. He broadcast the full council records on every open channel the fleet could reach. He added no commentary, no editorializing. The records spoke for themselves. Across the galaxy, alien audiences, most of whom had been told that the human war was an irrational reaction from a primitive species, began to watch the footage of Ambassador Voss's death, alongside the documentation proving it had been planned in advance. The effect was not immediate. It was quiet, the way the most important changes often are. 2 minor council species issued private statements to their populations, saying they had not known the full facts. One species, the Shen Collective, formally suspended their council membership pending review. The Trell Confederacy recalled their fleet representatives to the home system for strategic consultations, which was a polite way of saying they were no longer willing to fight for the council until they understood what they were actually defending. Reese also sent 3 private communications to the species that had voted against the motion. 2 did not respond. The third, a quiet seafaring people called the Oreth, whose homeworld was a planet of shallow warm oceans, sent back a single message. We know what they did. We have always known. We did not know if anyone would care enough to come. Alongside the message was a data packet containing navigation information, the precise coordinates and patrol schedules of the main council defense line protecting the station where the Galactic Council held its permanent sessions. It had been compiled over years by Orath diplomatic staff, who had been treated as furniture by council officials, who forgot they were beings with eyes and memories. Reese read the message twice, then walked it to Osmond's command deck. She read it without expression. She read the navigation data carefully. Then she looked up at Reese. "This changes the approach entirely," she said. "I know," he said. "We don't have to go through the defense line. We can go around it. The council doesn't know we have this." Osmond looked at the data for a moment longer. Then she set it down and straightened in her chair. "Set a new course," she told her navigation officer. "I'll give you the coordinates." Somewhere far behind them, on the council seat of power, Drav Sen received reports of the broadcasts and the defections and the Shen Collective's withdrawal. He sat in his high gallery and read the reports carefully. Then he composed a new message to the United Earth Assembly. It was a very different message from the first one. It used words like dialogue and misunderstanding and path toward resolution. It authored reparations. It suggested that a special review committee could be formed to examine the events at List 9. It carefully avoided the word apology, but arranged the surrounding sentences so that a reader in a forgiving mood might almost interpret one. He sent it and waited. The response came back in less than an hour. It was 3 words, sent from Admiral Osmond's command channel. "See you soon." The council's permanent station was called the Seat of Accord. It had been built 2,000 years ago at the gravitational center of a 5-star system that was otherwise uninhabited, chosen for its symbolic neutrality and its practical inaccessibility. To reach it from anywhere required either passing through heavily monitored jump corridors or navigating a dense field of debris left over from an ancient collision event that computers could map, but most pilots did not want to try. Admiral Osmond navigated the debris field. She did it slowly and carefully, using the navigation data the Oroth had provided, which included precise maps of the field's shifting boundaries, updated every 30 days. The Oroth diplomatic staff who had compiled those maps had done so over 12 years of quiet observation, recording the patrol patterns of the Council's guardian ships, noting the gaps in coverage that appeared at regular intervals when those ships rotated their routes. It was the kind of information that was invisible to anyone who was not looking, and completely obvious to anyone who was. The Council had never imagined that the being serving refreshments at their diplomatic receptions was memorizing their security schedules. The fleet emerged from the debris field 7 hours later, on the far side of the Council's defense perimeter. Behind them was the debris. Ahead of them was the Seat of Accord. Between them and it was a defense force of 60 ships that were now facing the wrong direction entirely. Osmond gave the order. The engagement lasted 4 hours. The Council's defense ships were not badly crewed. They fought hard. But they had been positioned to stop an assault coming through the main approach corridor, and by the time they finished turning around and reorganizing their formation, the human fleet was already past their optimal engagement range. 2 of the Council's destroyer-class vessels broke off early and broadcast a distress signal. Osmond let them go. She did not chase retreating ships. She had not come here to destroy everything she found. She had come for something specific. When the last defense ships had either been disabled or withdrawn, Osmond brought the fleet to a full stop and positioned the Voss directly above the Seat of Accord's main docking port. Then she powered down her weapon systems completely, every one of them simultaneously. The fleet followed her lead. She opened a broadcast channel to the station. "This is Admiral Kira Osman of the United Earth Expeditionary Armada. My weapons are down. My fleet is not here to destroy this station, or the beings inside it. We are here for Drav Sen of the Vreth Dominion, for the members of the Council who voted to execute Ambassador Sarah Voss, and for the members of the Council who designed the cover story that followed. You will send them to me. I will wait." She closed the channel. Her second-in-command looked at her from across the bridge. You think they'll actually send him? No, Osman said. Not yet. But they'll think about it. They waited for 11 hours. During those hours, Davin Reese sat in the small communications room adjacent to the bridge and worked. He had been in contact with emissary Tave throughout the campaign. And through Tave, he had opened lines to 6 other species, some former council members, some who had never joined, some whose public positions were carefully neutral. He was not negotiating a treaty. He was doing something more basic. He was talking to people. He was answering their questions honestly and asking for nothing in return, and in doing so, he was demonstrating something that the Council had never bothered to demonstrate in 2,000 years of existence. That the humans could be spoken to. At hour 7, the Shen Collective formally requested to be included in any post-engagement discussions. At hour 9, the Orath sent a ship, a small diplomatic vessel, which positioned itself alongside the Voss without explanation and simply stayed there. Reese understood. They were standing with humanity in the only way they could, quietly, in the dark. At hour 11, the Seat of Accord's docking port opened. A single Vreth transport emerged and moved toward the Voss. Inside it was Drav Sen, accompanied by 2 staff members and no weapons. Reese later learned from a Lyrai contact that Sen had been the first council member to agree to come, and that the only argument inside the station had not been whether to send him, but how to keep from looking like they were throwing him to his fate too eagerly. The tribunal was conducted in the Voss's main conference room. Reese ran it. He had suggested this to Osman, and she had agreed immediately, for reasons she did not explain, but which he understood. This had to look like justice, not revenge. And the person who ran it had to be someone whose voice had not ordered any of the battles. He had to be the man who escaped on a courier ship and filed a testimony. He was the closest thing they had to a witness. The session was broadcast live on every channel the fleet could reach. The evidence was simple. The Council's own records were entered into the record. Sen's voice was in those records, clearly and unmistakably, proposing the motion to execute the ambassador. The records of the cover story were entered. His voice was in those too. There was no interpretation required. There was no ambiguity to argue over. The documents said what they said. Sen sat across the table and did not deny any of it. His translator rendered his words in flat, even English, and he said more or less that the Council had been within its rights under interstellar law, that the human species had no recognized standing, and that the action had been judged necessary to preserve the authority of the institution. Reese let him finish. Then he said, "The law you used to justify this was written by you, enforced by you, and applied only to species you chose to recognize. You created a system that gave you the right to kill anyone you decided didn't deserve protection. Then you used it." He paused. "The problem isn't that you broke the law. The problem is that the law was yours." The broadcast reached 112 species. The verdict was formal and simple. Drav Sen and 14 named council members were found responsible for the premeditated killing of Ambassador Sarah Voss, and for the coordinated deception that followed. They were removed from any position of authority. The Galactic Council, its structure, its charter, its self-granted authority over interstellar law, was declared dissolved. It took 3 months to begin building what came next. The new body was called the Interstellar Assembly. Reese helped write its founding charter, working alongside Taev of the Lyrai, a Shen Collective representative, and 2 Orath diplomats who had never in their careers been allowed to speak in an official council session. The charter was 9 pages long and written in plain language on purpose. The first line read, "No species holds this assembly. The assembly holds itself." Representation was not based on age or territory or the size of a fleet. It was based on a rotating system of accountability, which meant that any member could be reviewed by the others at any time, and any member found to have acted against the basic principles of the charter could be suspended. It was imperfect. Everyone who wrote it knew that. but imperfect with accountability was better than perfect with none. Humanity held a permanent founding seat. So did the Lyrae, so did the Orath, so did the Shen Collective. The Vreth were offered associate status, with a path to full membership in 20 years if they met the Charter's conditions. Some people thought this was too generous. Reese had argued for it, and he stood by the argument. You do not build a galactic community by locking entire peoples out of it forever for the actions of their leadership. You build it by giving them a door and seeing if they walk through it. The memorial for Ambassador Sarah Voss was held on Earth, in an open square in the city of Nairobi, on a clear morning in early spring. The square could hold 40,000 people. 112,000 came. They stood in the streets around it, and listened to the service on speakers mounted on buildings and lampposts. Delegations arrived from 9 species. The Lyrae sent a formal embassy. The Orath sent a single representative, an elderly diplomat who had served on the seat of Accord for 30 years. He stood quietly at the back of the designated diplomatic area, and did not speak to anyone until after the ceremony, when Reese found him and thanked him for coming. The Vreth sent 2 delegates as well. They arrived without announcement and stood apart from the others. No one told them to leave. No one spoke to them. They stood through the entire ceremony and then departed quietly. Reese watched them go. Osmond came to stand beside him. The ceremony had ended. The crowd was beginning to move, slowly, the way crowds do when no one quite wants to be the first to leave. Do you think they understood it? Reese asked. He meant the Vreth. He meant the act of coming, the gesture of standing in a crowd of people you had wronged. Osmond thought about it for a moment. Maybe not yet, she said, but they came. They stood in the square as the morning light moved and the crowd thinned around them. She would have liked this, Reese said quietly. Not the war, the part after. Osmond did not answer immediately. She looked up, past the buildings and the last of the departing people, at the sky above the city. Pale blue, marked with the thin white lines of orbital traffic. A sky that now had more coming and going through it than it had ever had in human history. They learned what we are, she said. When we fight, when we don't stop, when we come through a debris field in the dark and park above their station with our weapons down and tell them to send out the man who started it. She paused. They know that now. Reese looked at the sky too. Now we show them what we can become, she said. The square was nearly empty. Somewhere overhead, the first ships of the new Interstellar Assembly's Joint Patrol were beginning their first shared rotation. 2 human vessels, 1 Lyrae, 1 Orath, flying the same route, at the same speed, for the first time. It was not peace. Peace was a long road, and they were only at the beginning of it. But it was a start, and it had a name.